The Dragon Court had gathered to sell its shame, and Selene Marr had been ordered to name the first price. She stood at the auction podium beneath 7 chandeliers of blackened crystal, her plain clerk's sleeves still ink-stained, despite the Chancellor's demand that she appear clean. Clean meant guilty without evidence. Clean meant presentable ruin. Clean meant the court could point to one fireless woman and say the kingdom's debt had worn her face all along. Around her, the Dragon Court auction hall glittered with wealth, pretending it had not come to beg. Creditors filled the lower benches in velvet and iron-gray silk. Merchant princes sat beside war lenders. Temple collectors held ivory debt rods across their knees. Noble houses whispered behind jeweled fans, while pretending their own vaults were not already pledged. Above them on the high dais, Dragon King Kaedric Solvar watched in black court armor, one hand resting on the arm of his obsidian chair, his gold eyes unreadable. Selene did not look at him for long. She had learned that a king's gaze could weigh a woman without seeing her. At the center of the hall, the Cinder Auction Flames burned inside a circular pit of dragonstone. They were old court law, older than Kaedric's throne, older than the gold doors, older than the Chancellor's velvet lies. No royal debt auction could begin until the Flames accepted a lawful opening bid. Coinland, dragon oil, military, iron bride, dowry, jewels, anything could be offered if the Flames judged it true value. Today, they had been summoned to auction the court's debt before Kaedric's alliance bride arrived from the southern Ember courts, and Selene Marr had been named the cause. Chancellor Voss Ardent stood to her right in pearl-gray robes, embroidered with silver account chains. He was beautiful in the way knives could be beautiful when laid on white cloth, polished thin and designed to make harm look ceremonial. His hand rested on a stack of debt scrolls tied with black ribbon. "Read the charge," he said. Selene looked at the top scroll. She knew the numbers before she saw them. She had copied them, corrected them, saved them, hidden their collapse beneath columns no one else could balance. For 11 years, she had kept the Dragon Court alive by stretching copper into gold, delaying creditor claims, reconciling war levies with famine accounts, and working through nights the nobles called quiet because they had never entered the quiet. Treasury after dusk. Then the debt finally showed its teeth. Voss gave the court a culprit, her. Selene read, because refusing would let him say she feared the numbers. "Selene Marr," she said, voice steady, former senior clerk of lower treasury records. Accused of falsifying royal debt ledgers, concealing unpaid obligations, misdirecting creditor notices, and contributing to the collapse of the Solvar treasury, former senior clerk. That was the soft title. Dismissed was the sharper one. Fraud was the public one. Fireless was the easiest. They said it carefully, as if a woman without dragon fire in her veins could not have held a kingdom's accounts together, only spoiled them with ink and sleep debt and ordinary hands. Kaedric's voice came from the dais. "Proceed with the auction." The command struck harder than Voss's charge. Selene did not turn toward him this time. Once before the accusations, Kaedric had found her in the lower treasury after midnight, surrounded by ledgers. No noble treasurer had dared touch. He had asked why the lamps were still burning. She had said because the court would not survive mourning if she let them go out. He had looked at the balanced columns, then not at her face. Later, when Voss accused her, Kaedric had believed the columns could lie. Or perhaps he had simply preferred a debt with one name attached. Voss lifted a gold bar from the creditor table and placed it in a silver bidding dish. Opening bid crown, reserve gold. Accepted against clerk falsified debt. The hall waited. The Cinder Auction Flames leaned toward the dish, then bent away. A murmur moved through the benches. Voss's mouth tightened. More gold. A clerk rushed forward with a second bar, then a third. The flames bent away from all of them. Selene felt the first strange prickle at the base of her throat. Cinder Auction Flames were not merciful. They did not defend the shamed. They did not choose favorites, brides, queens, or martyrs. They recognized value. That was all. Voss snapped his fingers. Dragon oil bonds. A creditor placed 3 sealed bonds into the dish. The flames turned black. Military iron. Black. Southern dowry jewels. The flames hissed so sharply that every bride envoy in the upper gallery sat straighter. Kaedric leaned forward. Voss spoke quickly. "The debt contamination is deeper than anticipated. The accused clerk's false ledgers have made valuation unstable. Selene looked at the flames. They had not touched the gold. They had not touched the jewels. They were waiting. For what? Voss turned to her with the smile he used before closing traps. Since the accused corrupted the debt record, let her open the auction in her own hand. If the flames reject her, the court will have proof that her ledgers cannot support lawful valuation. A guard placed the opening rod before Selene. It was black iron carved with old dragon claws and tipped with a coal that never cooled. She had seen treasurers use it 3 times in her life. Never clerks, never women from the lower office, never someone brought to the podium as evidence. Her fingers closed around it. The flames rose, not high, attentive. Selene heard Voss inhale. She lowered the rod toward the first debt scroll. Opening account. Treasury collapse entered under clerk falsified debt. The words tasted like ash. The scroll unrolled by itself. Lines of debt spilled downward, numbers multiplying, interest, teeth opening, creditor claims widening like cracks under stone. The court watched greedily, waiting to see her fraud become visible. Instead, the ink began to change. The numbers turned into hours. First column, night labor. Second column, unpaid. Third column, applied to royal survival. Selene's hand went cold. A flame shaped like a dragon's hand rose from the pit and lifted one burning finger. A bid. The auction bell rang once. Voss went still. The scroll read itself in a voice made of ember and paper. First bid recognized 1 winter night worked without wage to prevent grain account collapse. The hall fell silent. Another flame hand rose. Second bid recognized 3 nights reconciling war widows' ration debts after noble auditors withdrew. A third hand lifted. Fifth bid recognized 7 nights delaying Southern creditor seizure by absorbing error into personal service credit. Selene could not breathe. Those nights had no witness, no signature, no wage, no thanks. They lived only in the ache of her eyes, the ink under her nails, the years she had walked home after dawn, while the court woke rested and praised itself for surviving. Kaedric stood. The debt scroll in front of him burst into cinder light, and for one terrible breath, the numbers became a memory. Selene alone in the lower treasury, older than he remembered her, thinner than he had noticed, one hand pressed to her ribs. As she copied accounts beside a dying lamp, Voss spoke sharply. End the reading. The Cinder Auction Flames rose higher. More dragon hands lifted from the pit. The auction bell rang again and again and again. Recognized bid 11 unpaid years. Recognized bid, royal collapse, delayed by clerk service. Recognized bid debt carried by Selene Marr before crown acknowledgement. The court erupted. Selene looked at Kaedric across the hall. For the first time, he was not looking at the numbers. He was looking at her. Then the largest flame hand rose from the cinder pit and pointed not at Selene, not at the creditors, not at the king, at Chancellor Voss Arden's private ledger stack. The auction voice burned through the hall. Highest hidden bid pending sold service credit under Chancellor seal. The silver bidding dishes began to melt. Not from heat alone. From rejection, gold softened into useless puddles. Dragon oil bonds curled black at the edges. Southern dowry jewels cracked one by one in their velvet tray, each fracture sharp enough to make the bride envoys flinch in the upper gallery. The Cinder Auction Flames did not touch them. They did not burn what they refused to count. They only lifted their ember hands higher. Selene Marr stood at the podium with the black iron opening rod still in her grip, watching years of unpaid work rise through the court's most sacred auction law. The flame hands had not bowed to her. They had not crowned her. They had not called her chosen. Cinder Auction Flames recognized value. That was all. And the court had forgotten that labor could become value when gold ran out of truth. Chancellor Voss Ardent recovered with frightening grace. The auction is contaminated. A creditor laughed once too nervously to mean it. By unpaid work, by falsified memory, Voss said. The accused clerk held these ledgers for years. She may have embedded false service claims into the debt scrolls. Selene turned her head slowly. Embedded them where, in the nights no one paid me, the lower benches stirred. Voss's eyes sharpened, but his voice remained smooth. Invisible labor is easily claimed because it is difficult to prove. That struck deeper than the accusation. Because it was true. Invisible labor was useful until it demanded a name. Then, it became exaggeration, resentment, feminine grievance, clerical confusion. For 11 years, Selene's work had existed only when it saved someone else from consequence. Now that it had risen before witnesses, the court wanted proof it had ever belonged to her. Kaedric Solvar descended one step from the dais. Not enough to stand beside her. Enough to make the hall look at him. "Let the flames finish the valuation," he said. Voss bowed. Majesty with respect valuation cannot proceed while the accused controls the opening rod. Selene looked at Kaedric then. A foolish part of her waited. Not for belief. She was too old for that kind of mercy. For memory. The lower treasury. Midnight, the king's shadow in the doorway. His voice asking why the lamps still burned. Her answer because the court would not survive mourning if she let them go out. Kaedric's eyes met hers. Something moved there. Not enough. He looked at the rod in her hand. "Give the rod to the auction master." The flame pit hissed. Selene felt the sting before the words settled. Of course. Trust the flames, perhaps. Trust the records, perhaps. Trust her hand, not yet. She placed the opening rod on the podium without lowering her gaze. As the king commands, the auction master, an elderly noble with trembling fingers, stepped forward and took the rod. The flames went black. Every ember hand vanished. The hall dropped into darkness so sudden that several creditors cried out. The auction bell cracked once. Then silence. Voss smiled faintly. There. You see, her handling tainted the Selene, reached for the rod again. The auction master jerked it away. You are not permitted. The flame pit exploded blue-white, not upward, toward the rod. The black iron burned through the auction master's glove without touching skin, leaving one glowing mark on the handle where Selene's fingers had been. Keeper of account contact recognized. The old auction voice rolled through the hall. Not noble blood. Not crown fire. Account contact. Selene closed her hand, before anyone could see it shake. Kaedric stared at the mark. Voss spoke quickly. A lower treasury contact mark only proves she used the rod unlawfully in prior years. Selene almost laughed. I have never held this rod before today. Then how does it know you? The Cinder Auction Flames answered. Recognized labor contact through debt scroll correction, emergency account binding, unpaid survival, balancing night service credit. The words struck the court like falling stone. Night service credit. Several older creditors leaned forward at once. One whispered, "That is real law." Voss turned on him. The creditor swallowed, but continued, because money had made him braver than justice. Old auction rule. If a court employee works beyond wage to preserve crown solvency, the unpaid value can become service credit against royal debt. Only if recorded, Voss said. Selene looked at him, then read where it was recorded. The largest flame hand rose again and pointed to his private ledger stack. Voss placed one hand over the top book. These ledgers are Chancellor privilege. Kaedric stepped down another stair. No one touches those ledgers until the auction law reads them. Voss's mouth tightened. Majesty private treasury ledgers contain alliance, security, bride dowry arrangements, and war reserve. Then they should have no reason to fear value. Selene heard the danger under Kaedric's voice, but she also heard the hesitation. He was not defending her yet. He was defending the auction. The difference mattered. The flame hand curled one burning finger. Bid requested. The court looked toward Selene. Voss smiled again. The accused clerk cannot request a bid against Chancellor privilege. Selene set both hands on the podium. Then, I cancel the false auction. A collective breath tore through the hall. Voss went still. Selene lifted the opening rod, and this time the flames rose with it. This auction was called to sell debt under my alleged fraud. The flames rejected gold, bonds, iron, and dowry jewels because the debt is not priced there. I request lawful revaluation. The auction bell rang once. She turned toward Voss, bid on the Chancellor's private ledgers. The hall erupted. Voss slammed his hand down on the ledger stack. She has no authority. The Cinder Auction Flames rose in 7 dragon-shaped hands and seized the air above his books. Authority pending. Selene felt the trap before it formed. Voss looked toward Kaedric. Majesty, if you permit this, every creditor here will see the bride dowry accounts before the Southern Alliance is sealed. There it was. Not innocence, Leverage. Kaedric's face hardened. The Alliance bride was not in the hall, but her shadow sat in every broken jewel, every cracked bond, every creditor's eye. The southern courts had gold, dragonfire, armies. A marriage could save a treasury long enough to hide how close it was to collapse. Selene understood then why Voss had chosen today. He had needed her blamed before the bride arrived. He had needed the debt sold before the dowry accounts opened. The flame hands lowered toward the private ledgers. Voss's sleeve twitched, small, quick. Selene saw the movement and struck the podium bell with the opening rod. Seal the bid. The auction law answered faster than Voss's hand. The private ledger stack burst into cinderlight. Pages turned without touching. At first came normal debts, military grain bridge repairs, court robes, dragon oil reserves. Then the ink burned red. Bride dowry advance funded by transferred service credit. Kaedric stepped fully off the dais. Selene could not move. The next line opened beneath it. Source: unpaid night labor of Selene Marr, lower treasury clerk. The hall fell silent. Then the final line appeared, stamped under Chancellor seal. Sold before accusation. A crack ran through the southern dowry tray. It began under the largest ruby and spread outward through the gold setting thin as a hairline, loud as a verdict. The bride envoys in the upper gallery went still. No servant bent to remove the broken jewel. No creditor spoke. Every eye in the Dragon Court auction hall remained fixed on the private ledger stack burning in cinderlight beside Chancellor Voss Arden's hand. Selene Marr stood behind the auction podium, with the black iron opening rod in her grip. Her name glowed on the Chancellor's page, not as fraud, as value. Kaedric Solvar had stepped down from the dais, but he had not come to her side. Good. Selene did not need a king standing beside her before he understood what he had stood over. Voss recovered first. He always did. Emergency service transfer, he said, voice smooth enough to polish theft. Not theft, not fraud. Treasury stabilization. A creditor in the lower bench leaned forward. Service credit cannot fund a dowry unless it is assigned. Voss looked relieved by the word. Exactly. Selene felt the trap form. Assigned made it sound willing. Transferred made it sound lawful. Emergency made it sound noble. She looked at the cinder flames. Read the chain. Voss's head turned sharply. You do not command a royal auction. No, Selene said. I keep accounts. The Cinder Auction Flames rose in 7 dragon-shaped hands and struck the private ledger stack. Pages flew open one after another, their edges glowing blue-white. First entry, lower treasury night labor, converted to emergency service credit. Second entry, service credit, moved to Chancellor holding account. Third entry, holding account, pledged toward Southern Bride dowry advance. Fourth entry, public debt, reassigned to clerk falsification file. The court inhaled as one body. Selene did not. She had expected corruption, hidden accounts, false interest, private estates dressed as royal repairs. She had not expected the answer to be so plain. Voss had taken the years she gave to keep the court breathing, sold them into a marriage account, then blamed her for the hollow left behind. Kaedric's voice came low. The dowry was funded with her service. Voss turned to him at once. With Crown Service Credit, Majesty. Once labor enters royal survival accounts, it belongs to the throne. Selene looked at Kaedric. The hall narrowed to the space between them. Is that what you believe? The question was quiet. That made it worse. Kaedric's jaw tightened. The ruler in him reached for law. The debtor king reached for the Alliance bride waiting beyond the hall. The man beneath both reached for an answer that did not shame him. None came fast enough. Selene gave him the truth before he could dress silence as caution. You saw my work. You never saw me. The Cinder Auction Flames roared. Not in pity. In recognition of debt named accurately. Across the black marble walls, the ledgers turned into memory. Selene alone in the lower treasury after midnight, one candle guttering beside her ink bowl. Selene pressing a hand to her ribs while recopying grain columns after noble auditors left for a feast. Selene setting aside her wage packet and applying it to widow ration, arrears because the winter petitions had arrived before the royal coin. The hall watched the years it had slept through. A young noble whispered. She was there every night. Selene heard him. She did not look away from Kaedric. Voss struck the ledger with his signet ring. Memory bids are unstable. Pain exaggerates value. The flames went black. The largest cinder hand rose slowly, holding a burning scale of account. Pain not counted. Labor counted. The words burned above the podium. Selene breathed once and lifted the opening rod. Then bid the offset. Kaedric turned to her. What offset? The amount my work covered before Voss sold it? She faced the creditor benches. Let them hear how long this court survived on labor. It never paid. The flames opened the next page. Royal collapse delayed 1 year, 7 months, 12 days. A wave of sound moved through the creditors. The page turned. Creditor seizure prevented lower granaries, widow rations, northern road wages. Another line appeared. Emergency balance maintained by Selene Marr after Chancellor overspending. Kaedric's eyes cut to Voss. There is your missing number, Selene said. Overspending. Voss's private ledgers tried to shut. He moved only one finger, but the command ring under his glove flared. Selene struck the ledger stack with the opening rod. Keep bidding. The flames obeyed auction law. 3 hidden expenditures burned through the page. Southern Bride procession. Pearl Embassy gifts. Chancellor estate repairs listed as Dragon Court roof work. The court erupted. Voss's polished face finally cracked. Enough. Kaedric's voice cut through the hall. No one closes those ledgers. Voss turned on him. If this continues, the Southern Alliance withdraws. The creditors seize the court by morning. Your throne becomes a debtor's chair. Kaedric did not answer quickly. Selene did. Then let the creditors bid on the truth. The flames went still. She pointed the opening rod toward the lower benches. Who here accepted payment from my service credit? Silence. Then one ivory debt rod in the front row ignited blue. The creditor dropped it with a cry. Then another rod burned. Then another. The auction voice rose from the pit. Creditor claims tied to unpaid service credit. Public answer required. Voss backed 1 step. The ledger beneath his hand opened to a final hidden page, sealed in red dowry wax. Bride dowry completion pending. Funding source required. The red wax split. Remaining value to be extracted from Selene Marr after conviction. The red dowry wax dripped onto the black marble and hardened into the shape of a shackle. No one touched it. Not the creditors whose debt rods still burned blue. Not the Southern envoys watching their bride dowry account unravel. Not the nobles who had begun the morning eager to see one fireless clerk blamed neatly enough to save them from their own ledgers. Selene Marr looked at the shackle of wax, then at Chancellor Voss Ardent. So that was the rest of the auction, she said. Convict me first. Extract the remaining value after. Voss adjusted 1 silver account chain at his sleeve. The movement was small, precise, practiced. Debt fraud carries repayment obligation. If your falsification created the collapse, your service credit may be lawfully seized against the loss. My service credit had already been sold. Partially applied, he corrected. The remainder awaits judgment. Judgment you arranged before the auction began. His eyes cooled. Judgment made necessary by your records. The Cinder Auction Flames lowered their dragon-shaped hands, folding close to the pit. They were not finished. Selene could feel that in the rod's weight. Auction law did not care who looked ashamed. It cared where value had moved, who claimed it, and what had been given in return. Kaedric Solvar stepped nearer to the auction circle. What makes the extraction lawful? Voss turned to him at once. Consent. The word struck Selene more sharply than accusation. Voss lifted 2 fingers. A clerk from the Chancellor's table came forward, carrying a thin white scroll bound in red thread. He looked sick. That told Selene more than the scroll did. Service assignment consent, Voss said, signed by Selene Marr upon dismissal from lower Treasury office. Her unpaid service credit was pledged against royal solvency in exchange for protection from prison. A murmur moved through the hall. Selene stared at the scroll. She had signed many things the day they dismissed her. Inventory receipts, key returns, seal surrenders. A final wage refusal she had not understood because no wage had been offered. She had signed until her hand cramped while Voss's clerks watched for mistakes. But she had never consented to sell years of unpaid nights. Open it, Kaedric said. Voss smiled, gladly. Selene heard the confidence and knew the trap had been prepared well. The white scroll opened above the cinder pit. Her name appeared at the bottom in clean black ink, Selene Marr. The court exhaled. Kaedric's face closed. Selene did not move. Voss allowed the silence to grow. "You see, Majesty. The clerk now regrets an agreement she made when her fraud was discovered. Regret does not undo consent." Selene lifted the opening rod. The flames rose with it. "Bid the signature." Voss's smile faded. "The signature is visible. Visible is not the same." Underneath a second mark appeared. Not handwriting. Pressure. Auction law remembered the weight of a hand, the angle of a wrist, the pause before the last letter. Selene knew her own signature. It leaned left when she was tired. It cut the final stroke too deep. This one stood upright, elegant, and dead. The auction voice rolled through the hall. "Signature ink, Selene Marr. Signature pressure, not Selene Marr." The creditors erupted. Voss snapped. "Clerk copy signatures are common in dismissal bundles." Selene turned the rod slightly, read the source. The flames pulled a memory from the scroll. Not Selene at a table. Not Selene signing. A narrow hand pressed her name through a tracing frame. A clerk's hand. Male. Wearing a Chancellor's copying ring. The sick-looking clerk at Voss's table staggered back. Voss's voice sharpened. He acted under standard filing procedure. Selene faced the clerk. "Say whose order." The man's lips trembled. Voss said, "Do not answer." Kaedric's voice cut in low and dangerous. "Answer." The clerk bowed so hard his forehead nearly touched his ledger board. Chancellor Voss ordered the consent completed after Mistress Marr left the dismissal chamber. Voss turned on him. "Coward." The flames rose higher. Consent completed after departure. The white scroll blackened along its edges. Selene's throat tightened, but she did not let the court see how close the room felt. For years she had been told her exhaustion was proof of weakness. Now they had used that exhaustion to bury a forged consent beneath a stack of papers she had been too numb to question. Kaedric looked at her. She could feel him trying to find an apology that did not insult her. He found none. Good. Voss changed weapons. Even if the consent was procedurally flawed, royal approval cures the defect. The hall went quiet again. Selene looked at him slowly. Kaedric did too. Voss lifted the lower edge of the scroll. Beneath the false consent pressed in gold wax was the Dragon King's audit approval. Real, not copied, not forged. Kaedric stared at it. Selene felt something inside her, close, not breaking, just becoming inaccessible. Voss bowed toward the king. "Your Majesty approved the assignment when the Chancellor's office submitted the dismissal file." Kaedric said nothing. Selene did, then read what he approved. The flames opened the gold seal. A short audit line burned above the scroll. "Approve recovery of fraudulent clerk value to stabilize bride dowry deficit." Kaedric's face lost color. Voss spread his hands. "A lawful royal correction." Selene looked at the king across the fire. "No," she said. "A lie made expensive enough for you to sign." The cinder flames struck the podium bell without her hand. A hidden page slid from beneath the consent scroll. It bore only one line. "Final extraction requires debtor mark before public creditors." Then iron rings rose from the auction pit and opened at Selene's feet. The southern envoys covered their dowry jewels with black silk. That was the first honest gesture Selene Marr had seen from them all morning. The jewels still glowed beneath the cloth, red and gold and useless, while the Cinder Auction Flames waited. Creditors leaned forward in their benches. Nobles looked everywhere except at the iron rings waiting open before the podium. No one wanted to name what those rings meant. Debtor mark. Not imprisonment yet. Worse. A debtor mark would bind Selene's remaining service credit to the court until every claimed loss was paid. Her nights were already gone. Her wages had been swallowed. Her name had been turned into a falsification file. Now Voss wanted the law to reach forward and take whatever she still had left to give, her future. Chancellor Voss Ardent stepped beside the auction pit. "The mark is procedural." Selene looked at him. So was the forged consent. A flicker crossed his mouth. "Small." There. The court did not see it. Kaedric Solvar did. "No one marks her while the flames are reading," the Dragon King said. The iron rings stopped turning. Voss bowed, but his eyes remained cold. Majesty delay risks the Southern Alliance. The bride dowry deficit requires completion before sunset. If the accused is not marked, Creditors may seize royal assets directly. Then let them wait. They will not. A creditor in the lower bench lifted his ivory debt rod. The Chancellor is correct. Without debtor binding, the court's pledge weakens. Selene turned toward him. Your rod burned blue because you were paid from my service credit. The man lowered it. Not from shame. From fear. Selene lifted the opening rod and pointed it toward Kaedric's gold audit seal on the false consent scroll. Read the approval sequence. Voss's head snapped toward her. That seal has already been established as royal. I did not ask if it was royal. I asked what was placed before it. Kaedric's gaze found hers across the flames. There was pain in his face now, but pain was not record. Men had ruined women with regret before. Selene needed sequence. Read it, Kaedric said. The Cinder Auction Flames bent over the gold wax. The seal opened like an eye. First, the court saw Kaedric's hand. Not memory as pity. Not a dream, a record. He sat in a war-dark chamber with 3 debt scrolls spread before him, jaw shadowed with exhaustion armor still dusted from border ash. Voss stood at his shoulder with a summary page. The auction voice read the top line. Lower treasury collapse, attributed to clerk falsification. Second line. Unpaid service credit, recoverable under fraud correction. Third line. Bride dowry stabilization urgent. Kaedric signed. The memory ended. Voss spread his hands. There. The king approved recovery. Selene's grip tightened around the rod. Read the missing attachments. Voss said nothing. The flames turned blue. Beneath the summary page 3 ghost scrolls appeared. Not given to Kaedric. Not placed on the table. Filed underneath the Chancellor's private mark before the king entered the chamber. First, missing attachment, lower treasury survival report. Second, service credit accumulation record. Third, Chancellor overspending schedule. The hall changed. Kaedric stared at the empty space where those documents had not been. You removed them, he said. Voss answered too quickly. I condensed them. You buried them. I protected the throne from clerical fog. Selene looked at Kaedric. You signed the page that made me debtor because you saw his summary. Not my ledgers. Kaedric's voice came rough. Yes. The admission settled heavily. Voss tried to move past it. Even if the summary was incomplete, royal pressure remains valid. A king cannot unsign debt because a clerk dislikes the result. Selene turned back to the flames, bid the result. The auction pit shuddered. The iron rings at her feet lifted into the air and opened wider. Inside each ring, cinder light formed images of the years Voss meant to claim Selene older, thinner, bent over future accounts. Selene sleeping beside ledgers because the court owned her hours. Selene's name erased from wage rolls and entered under debt recovery until the bride dowry account closed. A noblewoman whispered, "That is indenture." The flames corrected her. Unlawful extraction of living service under false fraud value. Voss's face hardened. Auction flames do not judge law. Selene looked at him. They judge value. She stepped closer to the rings. Kaedric moved sharply. Selene. She did not look back. Do not make fear sound like command. He stopped. Selene held the opening rod over the first ring. If I am the debtor, show what I owe. The ring burned black. Owed by Selene Marr, nothing proven. The second ring flared. Owed to Selene Marr. 11 unpaid years, 1 year, 7 months, 12 days of royal survival offset, misassigned service, credit, false fraud, penalty. The third ring opened, debtor of record Chancellor, Voss ardent. The court erupted. Voss lunged for the scroll. Kaedric's sword came down between his hand and the page. No. One word. Enough steel to silence the hall. Voss withdrew slowly, but his eyes had changed. He was no longer trying to look innocent. He was calculating what could still be destroyed. Selene saw his gaze shift to the southern gallery, to the covered jewels, to the bride dowry account still unfinished. The Cinder Auction Flames saw it too. The black silk over the jewels caught fire without burning. A new line appeared above the dowry tray. Final bride payment secured through private Chancellor vault. Selene's breath caught. Voss went pale. Then the flames raised one dragon-shaped hand toward a sealed door behind the auction dais. Private vault, bid pending. Royal presence required. The sealed door behind the auction dais did not look important until the flames named it. It was narrow, half-hidden between two black marble pillars with no jewel work, no dragon crest, no gold handle to announce wealth. A servant's door, someone might have thought. A storage room for old chairs. A place beneath notice. Selene Marr knew better. The richest rooms in a failing court were often the plainest. Chancellor Voss Ardent turned toward the southern gallery before anyone else could speak. The private vault contains alliance-sensitive instruments. Opening it before creditors would endanger the bride treaty. The southern envoys stiffened at once. A tall envoy in pale ember silk rose from the upper bench. If the dowry security is exposed unlawfully, the southern court will consider this auction hostile. Voss did not smile. He did not need to. He had placed the bride treaty between himself and the truth. Kaedric Solvar looked from the envoy to the sealed door. His face was unreadable, but Selene had learned to read the pause before power chose its shape. He was weighing throne marriage creditors, alliance collapse. Again, a woman's record weighted beneath everyone else's emergency. Selene stepped down from the podium. The iron rings at her feet fell silent behind her. The Cinder Auction Flames followed the motion of the opening rod in her hand, lowering like watchful beasts. Voss's eyes narrowed. The accused clerk has no authority to approach a royal vault. Selene stopped before the sealed door, then read ownership, not locks. The flames lifted one dragon-shaped hand. The door's iron seams glowed. Kaedric descended the final stair from the dais. "What does the vault require?" The auction voice answered from the pit. "Royal presence required. Chancellor access claimed. Value ownership disputed." Selene looked at Kaedric. "It needs you present, not leading." A quiet shock passed through the hall. Voss seized it. "Majesty, this is insubordination." Kaedric's gaze stayed on Selene. Something like pain moved beneath his control, but he did not make it her burden. "Open the vault," he said. Voss moved. Majesty, Kaedric did not raise his voice. No guard crosses the auction circle. No creditor removes a record. No minister touches Selene Marr while the flames are bidding. The last words landed with heat. Selene hated that some part of her heard protection in them. She also knew protection was not repayment. The sealed door opened inward. Cold air rolled out first. Not the damp chill of stone. The dry cold of hidden metal-locked paper and accounts kept too long from daylight. Inside, the vault shelves climbed from floor to ceiling. Gold sat there, yes, but not enough to save a kingdom. Dowry jewels lay in open trays, but fewer than promised. The true weight of the room was paper, bonds, claims, private pledge scrolls. At the center stood a black cinder coffer with Selene's name burned into its lid. Not written, branded. The court saw it. Selene felt every gaze strike her back. Voss spoke quickly. "Evidence storage." "No," Selene said. "Evidence does not earn interest." She lifted the opening rod. Bid the coffer. The Cinder Auction Flames surged through the doorway and wrapped the black box in dragon hand light. The lid opened without touch. Inside were narrow strips of dark paper, each one stamped with a night mark. Selene recognized the marks before the flames read them. Treasury night labor, emergency balance hours, deferred wage conversion, service credit bonds. Her throat closed. Voss had not merely sold the first value of her unpaid work. He had divided it, renamed it, and stored pieces of her life like coin. The auction voice read the first bond, 100 nights assigned to bride procession cost. Second bond, 70 nights assigned to Pearl Embassy gift deficit. Third bond, 200 nights, reserved for post-conviction recovery. A creditor whispered living collateral. Selene turned. The words settled over her skin like ash. Living collateral meant the debt did not end with past work. It could claim future labor, future wages, future years. A court could own the usefulness of a person without calling her enslaved. Voss's face had hardened. Legal, under fraud recovery. Selene looked at the coffer. "I was not convicted. You would have been." The simplicity of it silenced the room. Kaedric stepped into the vault doorway. "You prepared recovery before judgment. I prepared survival before collapse. You prepared ownership." Voss's eyes flashed. A value she created inside royal service. Selene turned to Kaedric. "Ask the flames who spent it." Kaedric looked at her then, at the coffer. "Read expenditure." The flame hands plunged into the black box. Images rose one by one above the vault pearl carriages for the Southern bride, rode jeweled banners for a procession not yet, held private repairs to Voss's country estate, creditor gifts sealed under bridal diplomacy, and a hidden transfer into a Chancellor reserve account. Not many. Enough, Voss's polished calm broke. Every court needs appearances. Selene said, "You bought appearances with knights you never saw." The flames struck the coffer. A final bond rose from beneath the others, thicker than the rest, sealed in black and gold. Kaedric's royal approval marked one side. Voss's Chancellor seal marked the other. Selene's name burned between them. The auction voice lowered. Final living collateral bond. Activation condition, public debtor mark. Value remaining, all future service of Selene Marr until bride dowry deficit is closed. Kaedric's face went white with controlled fury. Voss lifted his chin. Break that bond, and the dowry collapses. The Southern envoy stood sharply. If the dowry collapses, so does the treaty. Creditors rose in the lower benches. The hall became a storm of hunger and fear. Selene looked at the living collateral bond, then at the Cinder Auction Flames. For the first time, she smiled. Small, tired, dangerous. Then the dowry has been bidding with the wrong debtor. She lifted the opening rod and pointed it straight at Voss Ardent. Transfer the bid. The creditor benches moved like a field of blades in wind. Ivory debt rods lifted. Iron claim hooks clicked open. Temple collectors reached for their sealed tablets. The moment Selene Marr pointed the opening rod at Chancellor Voss Ardent, every person owed money by the Dragon Court understood what had changed. A debtor had been named. Not by rumor, not by pity, by auction law. Voss did not step back this time. He smiled. Transfer requires accepted liability, he said. I accept none. The Cinder Auction Flames folded their dragon-shaped hands over the black cinder coffer. The living collateral bond floated above it, still carrying Selene's name between Kaedric's royal approval and Voss's Chancellor seal. Selene looked at the flames, read who benefited. Voss's smile thinned. Benefit is not debt, no, Selene said. But hidden benefit creates claim. A low sound passed through the creditors. Kaedric Solvar stood in the vault doorway, black armor lit by cinder blue. His hand rested on his sword, but he did not draw it. Selene noticed that. He was learning slowly and painfully that steel could stop a man, but it could not balance an account. The flame hands opened the coffer wider. One by one, private bonds rose into the air. Chancellor estate repairs. Embassy gifts charged to bride diplomacy. Personal vault interest drawn from lower treasury survival fund. Dowry deficit hidden through clerk service credit. Each bond turned in the air until the back showed a receiving mark. Voss Ardent. The court's noise sharpened. Voss lifted both hands in controlled contempt. Administrative flow. Every chancellor's office receives value and redistributes it. Selene pointed the rod toward the estate repair bond. Redistributed to whose roof the bond burned. Voss Ardent private residence. She pointed to the embassy gift bond, whose account received the return. The bond burned again. Chancellor reserve account. She pointed to the living collateral bond, whose deficit required my future service. The flames went still. For the first time all morning, Voss looked at the fire as if it might answer wrongly. The auction voice rose from the pit. Bride dowry deficit created by Chancellor overdraw. Selene did not breathe. There it was, not only theft, cause. Kaedric's voice came quietly. The dowry was not failing because of the treasury. The flames answered. Correct. It was failing because of Voss. Correct. Voss turned sharply. Because I held this court together. While your majesty bled gold into war, repairs northern roads, dragon stables, widow rations. Accounts Selene balanced, Kaedric said. The words struck the hall. Voss's eyes flashed. Accounts, she distorted. Selene lifted the rod again, then bid the original balance. The flames reached into the coffer and drew out a thin gray scroll sealed with lower treasury dust. Selene recognized the fold, her own work, not signed with pride. Signed because no one else had stayed awake long enough to finish it. The scroll opened. Original lower treasury balance, before Chancellor adjustments solvent under restriction. A second line appeared. Collapse triggered after transfer of service credit to bride dowry account. A third. Fraud file opened after transfer. The creditor benches erupted. Voss moved at once, not toward Selene, but toward the Southern envoy. Withdraw from this hall. Now. If your court remains, you become witness to a hostile seizure of Alliance property. The envoy hesitated. Kaedric's voice cut through the storm. No envoy leaves while royal debt is under auction reading. The Southern envoy stiffened. You risk the treaty. Kaedric did not look away from Voss. The treaty is already written on stolen value. Selene felt the words but did not soften toward them. Too late was still too late. Voss's mask broke for a heartbeat. Under it lived fury, fear, and a bright-cornered intelligence. He seized the living collateral bond from the air. The flames screamed. The bond did not burn in his hand. It tightened. Around Selene's wrist. Pain shot up her arm. Kaedric stepped forward. Voss held the bond higher. If the court wants debtor transfer, the collateral must survive. She is the collateral. Mark her first transfer later. The iron rings from the auction pit rose again. This time, they flew toward Selene. Kaedric's sword came out. No one touches her. Voss smiled through the cinder light. Then the dowry collapses, the creditors seize your court, and the Southern Treaty dies before sunset. Selene gripped her bound wrist and forced herself to stand straight. The flames did not choose her. They counted value, so she gave them a number. Bid my injury. The hall fell silent. Voss's smile vanished. Selene held up the wrist where the living collateral bond burned into her skin. If I am collateral, every harm done to preserve the false debt enters the account. Bid it. The Cinder Auction Flames surged. The iron rings stopped inches from her body. New valuation opened. Unlawful restraint of creditor witness. Attempted forced debtor mark. Collateral injury caused by Chancellor claimant. Debt penalty assigned. The living bond snapped off Selene's wrist and flew back into the coffer, blackening as it went. Then the cinder flames formed a new set of rings, not at Selene's feet, at Voss Arden's. The auction voice filled the vault. Debtor transfer accepted. Chancellor Voss Ardent to answer full claim. But before the rings closed, Voss drove his command ring into the coffer lock. The private vault walls split open. Behind the shelves, hidden doors slid wide, revealing a second chamber full of sealed creditor contracts. At the center stood a black bride chest, and on its lid burned Kaedric's name. The second chamber smelled of sealed gold, not clean gold, hidden gold. Gold shut too long from air mixed with old wax creditor ink and the dry rot of contracts no honest treasury would keep behind a false wall. At the center, the black bride chest waited under cinder light. Kaedric Solvar's name burned on its lid. The court saw it before he moved. The creditors saw it. The Southern envoys saw it. Selene Marr saw Voss Arden's trap finally open its deepest mouth. Voss stood inside the debtor rings, breathing hard, one burned hand still braced against the broken coffer lock. Yet he smiled as if the room had turned in his favor. You wanted the true debtor, he said. There he is. Kaedric's face did not change, but Selene saw the blow land. A king could survive accusation. He could survive debt. What he could not easily survive was his own name binding a bride treaty to stolen value in front of every creditor who had come to collect. The cinder flames lifted toward the chest. Voss spoke louder. The bride chest is royal property, sealed under Dragon King authority. If its accounts are opened, the Southern court may claim insult breach and compensation. The Southern envoy's hand tightened on the gallery rail. The creditors leaned forward. Selene stepped before the chest. Kaedric turned sharply. Selene. She did not look back. Do not make my name your shield now. Silence cut through the vault. The words hurt him. Good. Pain was not the same as payment, but it kept him from pretending rescue could erase approval. Selene lifted the opening rod. Read ownership sequence. Voss laughed. His name is on the chest. So was mine on the forged consent. The flames answered before the court could. Ownership sequence required. The black bride chest opened. Inside lay no jewels. Only folded contracts, each tied with red silk and sealed in gold wax. The first rose into the air. Bride chest established under royal name. Second, funded through Chancellor-controlled dowry channel. Third, secured by recovery of alleged clerk fraud value. Fourth, Future payment guaranteed by royal liability if service collateral fails. Kaedric's jaw tightened. Selene understood it then. If she could not be marked as debtor, Kaedric became liable. If Kaedric became liable, the creditors could seize the court. If the court was threatened, Voss could argue that Selene's binding was necessary to save the throne. A circle. Voss had built a debt trap with her body on one side and the king's crown on the other. Kaedric stepped toward the chest. Then the liability is mine. Selene spun toward him. No. Every face turned. He looked at her with a darkness she had not seen before. My seal approved the file, and his lie created it. My name binds the chest. Your name was used to make the trap respectable. I am still king, and I am still the account he stole from. The flames roared. Value source speaks. Selene faced the chest again before Kaedric could turn guilt into sacrifice. Read value source. The red silk ties blackened. A memory rose above the contract's Voss in a private treasury room, placing Selene's service bonds into the bride chest one by one. Not Kaedric. Voss. The king's name already pressed onto the lid before the contents arrived. The auction voice burned through the vault. Royal name used as cover. Chancellor channel controlled contents. Service collateral source Selene Marr. Liability trigger designed to force debtor mark. Voss's smile thinned. A creditor said, "Then the king is guarantor, not debtor." Another answered, "If fraud is proven, guarantor may recover against the fraudulent controller." The room shifted. Voss heard the money turn against him. He struck fast. "Then recover," he said. "Strip my office, seize my estate, break my vault. It will not fill the bride chest before sunset." The southern envoy stood. "The dowry deficit must be resolved today." "Exactly," Voss said. "The court needs value now. The only value large enough is her service." The iron rings at Voss's feet trembled uncertain. Selene felt the danger. Auction law had exposed the lie, but debt still wanted payment. A hungry creditor did not care whether value had been stolen if stolen value could still be collected. She gripped the rod harder. "Bid the Chancellor's future office." Voss froze. The flames turned toward him. Selene's voice steadied. "If I can be marked for future service, so can the debtor of record. Bid every Chancellor wage estate, yield private reserve and office pension until the bride chest is whole." The creditor benches erupted. Voss's face went white. "No," he said. The flames answered. "Lawful counterbid." Kaedric looked at Selene, not with pity, with recognition sharp enough to wound them both. She had not asked him to save her. She had balanced the room. One by one, Voss's rings lowered toward his wrists. Then the black bride chest screamed. Its lid split from within, and a final contract rose, sealed not in gold wax, but in dragon blood red flame. The southern envoy gasped. Voss closed his eyes. Selene knew before the auction voice spoke that this was the part he had feared more than exposure. Hidden bride clause revealed. If dowry fails before marriage, Dragon King must bind living collateral as royal consort debt. The contract turned in the air. The named collateral burned through the flame. Selene Marr. A drop of dragon blood red flame fell from the contract and struck the marble without spreading. It stayed there round and bright like an eye. No one in the vault breathed loudly. The southern envoy had gone rigid in the gallery. The creditors held their rods close to their chests. Even the Cinder Auction Flames lowered not in fear but in recognition of an old clause waking inside a newer lie. Consort debt. Selene Marr had read the term twice in dead law books, and once in a sealed divorce archive no clerk was supposed to touch. It was not marriage, not truly. It was a royal binding used when a bride treaty failed, and the court needed living value pledged to stabilize the throne. A woman could be named as consort debt if her labor bloodline dowry or service credit was large enough to replace a broken alliance. The court would call it honor. The account would call it ownership. Chancellor Voss Arden's debtor rings still hovered near his wrists, but his eyes had sharpened with ugly triumph. "There," he said softly. "The law provides its own answer." Kaedric Solvar looked at the burning contract as if he meant to tear it apart with his hands. Selene spoke before he moved. "Do not touch it." His gaze snapped to her. "If you destroy the clause," she said, "he will say the king burned the only lawful answer before creditors could read it." Voss smiled. "The clerk understands debt better than her king." Kaedric's jaw hardened. Selene stepped closer to the floating contract. The opening rod felt heavy in her hand, not with magic, but with consequence. She was tired of rooms where men placed her future between emergencies and called the shape of the trap necessary. "Read consent," she said. Voss's smile faded. "Consort debt does not require ordinary consent when royal solvency is at risk." "Then read who named the collateral." The flames turned blue-white. The red contract unfolded. Clause drafted by Chancellor Office. Collateral selected by Chancellor Voss Ardent. Royal review pending upon dowry failure. Kaedric's eyes narrowed. Pending. Selene looked at him. "You had not signed this," no, Voss said quickly. "But the bride treaty activates the review automatically if the dowry fails." "Review is not binding," Selene said. The auction voice answered. "Correct." The creditors stirred. Voss's rings dropped closer to his skin. He raised his voice. "Without collateral, the bride chest fails. Without the bride chest, the treaty fails. Without the treaty, this court collapses before nightfall." Selene faced the creditor benches. "You hear that he is not asking whether the debt is true. He is asking whether you are hungry enough to collect it from the wrong person." A few creditors looked away. "Not many. Enough." The Southern envoy spoke from the gallery. "The Southern court requires value equal to the promised dowry." "Then claim it from the one who stole the first value," Selene said. Voss laughed. "You would replace a royal consort clause with my wages," no, Selene said. "With everything your office hid." She lifted the rod toward the false wall, and the shelves of contracts behind it. "Bid Chancellor authority." The flames rose. Voss went still. Selene continued before anyone could interrupt. "Not his salary alone, his office percentages, his private reserves, his estate repairs charged to court accounts, his commission from creditor extensions, his bride, procession, surplus, his control of debt penalties, his right to collect on accounts he falsified." The Cinder Auction Flames struck the vault shelves. Contracts flew open like black birds. For the first time, the numbers did not turn into Selene's nights. They turned into Voss's gains. Chancellor commission unpaid, private reserve concealed, creditor extension fee withheld, estate value improved through court charge, bride dowry deficit caused by Chancellor overdraw. The auction bell rang once. Counterbid accepted. The debtor rings snapped, shut around Voss's wrists. He staggered more from shock than pain. "No," he said. "Those assets are administrative instruments." Selene looked at him coldly. "So was I," the flames roared. Kaedric stepped forward but not past her. "Read total value." The contracts spiraled above the vault. Gold numbers bled into cinder memory, then hardened into one figure. Enough to complete bride chest. Enough to restore lower treasury emergency balance. Enough to repay service credit owed to Selene Marr in part. In part? The words cut deeper than Selene expected. 11 years and even a chancellor's hidden wealth could not fully return what had been taken. Kaedric saw her face. This time he did not apologize. He looked at the contract and spoke to the hall. "The consort debt clause is rejected. No living collateral will be bound under my name." Voss lunged against the rings. Then the alliance collapses. The Southern envoy answered before Kaedric could. "Not if value is restored from fraudulent Chancellor assets." Voss turned on him in disbelief. Money had changed sides. Selene almost admired its honesty. The flames lifted the red bride contract one last time. Consort debt collateral invalid. Fraudulent selection. Value source misnamed. The contract burned from the inside out. Not to ash, to account. The cinderlight poured into the black bride chest, filling its empty base with Voss's seized bonds. The covered dowry jewels stopped glowing. The creditor rods dimmed from blue to dull white. Then every flame hand turned toward Selene. She stiffened. Kaedric did too. The auction voice spoke. False debtor cleared. Service credit claimant recognized. Restored financial authority required to settle public debt. Voss, bound in rings, gave a sharp laugh. "You would let the Fireless Clerk command royal creditors." Selene looked at the flames. They did not choose her. They counted what the court owed. She set the opening rod across the podium. Then let the final debt reading begin. The auction bell sounded from beneath the floor. Not above the hall, beneath it. The sound traveled through black marble creditor benches, sealed vault doors, and the old dragonstone pit until every chandelier of dark crystal rang softly in answer. The Dragon Court auction hall had heard bids of gold, land oil, iron, dowry, jewels, and blood oath before. It had never heard a kingdom ask to price what it owed a woman it had trained itself not to see. Selene Marr stood at the podium with the opening rod laid across the wood before her. She did not lift it. She did not need to. The Cinder Auction Flames had recognized her claim, but recognition was not restoration. Courts loved naming debt after payment became impossible. She would not let them make ceremony out of another delay. "Read public debt," she said. The flames rose in 7 dragon-shaped hands. One hand pointed to the creditor benches, one to the black bride chest, one to Voss Ardent, bound in debtor rings, one to Kaedric Solvar. The last 3 turned toward the podium. Selene held still. The auction voice filled the hall. Debt owed by Dragon Court to creditors active. Debt owed by Chancellor Voss Ardent to Dragon Court proven. Debt owed by Dragon Court to Selene Marr unresolved. A ripple passed through the room. Voss laughed, once bitter and sharp. Unresolved. How convenient. She still cannot be paid. Selene looked at him. I did not ask for convenience. She reached for the first debt scroll and opened it herself. Granary seizure claim, she read. Creditor paid from service credit, while lower villages were told royal stores were empty. The creditor holding that rod stood. We were paid lawfully. Selene turned the scroll. The Cinder Auction Flames burned a hidden line through the wax. Paid from misassigned unpaid service credit. Then answer lawfully, Selene said. The creditor's rod dimmed. The flames moved to the next claim. Widow ration arrears, delayed under treasury collapse, covered twice in lower records, removed by Chancellor adjustment. A temple collector lowered his eyes. Dragon stable wages. Paid late because service credit was moved to bride procession. A war lender cursed under his breath. Selene kept reading. Not quickly, not cruelly, clearly. By the 7th claim, the court had stopped watching her as an accused clerk. By the 12th, the creditors had begun checking their own rods. By the 20th, Chancellor Voss no longer looked like the man who had controlled the room. He looked like an account coming due. Kaedric stood beside the auction circle, silent and pale beneath the cinder light. Every few lines the flames turned toward him and showed the gold audit seal he had signed. He did not look away. Selene noticed. She did not thank him for endurance. Truth did not become kinder because a king finally allowed it to hurt. When the last creditor claim dimmed, the bride chest opened. Voss's seized bonds poured into it as burning strips, estate yield, hidden reserve commission, interest creditor, extension fees, false roofwork claims, Chancellor pension, private vault surplus. The dowry deficit closed with a sound like iron sinking into water. The Southern envoy stood. The Southern court accepts restored value, he said carefully, and requests amended treaty record naming Chancellor fraud as source of delay. Voss stared at him. Coward. No, Selene said. Creditor. That answer traveled through the hall with a strange, dry force. A few people almost laughed, then remembered they were standing inside a public ruin. The Cinder Auction Flames turned toward Selene. Restored financial authority required. Voss pulled against the rings. She cannot command creditors. She is fireless. The flames did not flare. They simply answered. Fire not required. Account contact required. Labor record required. Debt sequence required, Selene Marr recognized. The opening rod rose from the podium by itself and hovered before her. Selene did not take it at once. She looked at Kaedric. If I lift that, she said, it is not because you permit me. His voice was rough. No, it is not because the court feels sorry. No, it is not because the flames chose me. Kaedric looked at the cinder pit. They counted what we owed. Selene took the rod. The flames bowed not to her, but to the account finally balancing under the correct hand. The auction voice spoke once more. By debt law creditor witness unpaid service credit and public valuation, Selene Marr is restored as Treasury Authority of the Dragon Court until royal debt settlement completes. The hall erupted, this time not in panic, in fear of a woman with the ledgers back in her hands. Selene struck the podium once. First order, No creditor collects from lower granaries, widow rations, road wages, or dragon stable pay until Chancellor fraud recovery is exhausted. Several creditors rose. She looked at them. You wanted the truth to have value. Now it does. They sat. Second order. Every account bearing my service credit is reopened before public witness. The flames rang. Third order. Chancellor Voss Arden's private ledgers remain burning until every hidden transfer is read. Voss's face twisted. You will destroy the office. No, Selene said. I will make it show its work. That wounded him more than rage would have. The debtor rings dragged him back from the vault threshold. Guards took him then, not roughly, but publicly, with message chains of account silver locked over his wrists. He did not beg. Men like Voss rarely did. He looked at Selene as if her survival remained, the one number he could not forgive. By dusk, the auction hall had changed. The bride jewels were resealed under amended treaty law. The creditor rods were stacked for review. The lower treasury doors closed, since Selene's dismissal were reopened with public witnesses. Clerks who once avoided her eyes now waited with fresh ink and trembling hands. Selene stood at the podium long after the flames lowered. Kaedric came no closer than 3 steps. I accepted his claim that you falsified the debt, he said. Yes. I saw the numbers fail after you were gone and did not ask why they had stood while you remained. Yes. I saw your work. Selene looked at him then. The hall was almost empty. Cinderlight moved across his face, cutting the king from the man. You never saw me, she said. No, Kaedric answered. I did not. There was no plea in it. That was why she let the silence stay. At last, he said, what is owed to you will be paid before my bride procession, before creditor feast, before court repair, before crown comfort. Not as apology, as debt, he said. Then quieter, as truth. Selene looked down at the rod in her hand. It was heavy, old, and warm, from work finally named. I will decide the order of payment. Yes, Treasury Authority Marr. Not former clerk. Not fireless scapegoat. Not fraud. Selene turned back to the cinder pit. The flames burned low. No longer dragon hands. No longer bidders. Only watchful coals, keeping account of what the court still owed. They had not chosen her. They had remembered value. And beneath the black chandeliers of the Dragon Court auction hall, the woman they tried to sell as debt began balancing the kingdom back into truth.